Hello chess friends and welcome to Qe2 Chess channel and welcome back to our Queen's Gambit Declined series. So in this series we're following this very nice opening from White's and from Black's perspective, and today we're continuing with our Queen's Gambit Declined series with the so-called Vienna Variation. So the Vienna Variation we have started yesterday with our analysis of this very sharp opening, and in that video we have already explained the most important tactical motifs and the most important traps that you have to know if you face maybe the Vienna Variation or if you play the Vienna Variation yourself. Here's the link of the video, please check it out. I think there were really some brutal tactics in that video that you have to know, as I said, because if you don't know some of these motifs, you could get crushed very easily and in an early stage of the game. So that's why I think the first video of the series was very important. So let's start now with our common deeper analysis of the Vienna Variation. Today I've prepared this passive or maybe calm way to proceed with the move e3. There is of course also a more aggressive method to meet the Vienna Variation with the move e4. So I prepared now really a beautiful gameplay by Vladimir Kramnik in the e3 line against Garry Kasparov. Here I think you'll see the most important strategical motifs of the Vienna Variation, and here Vladimir Kramnik in one particular moment pulled off such a brutal and beautiful tactic. In my opinion, it was really one of the best tactical shots that you see. It was an mortal bishop sacrifice just to get the pawns rolling. So it was a huge and perfect destruction by Kramnik against also top grandmaster, of course, the legend of support against Garry Kasparov. So be prepared. This is a really brutal game, but I think the value of this game was really the most important strategical ideas of the Vienna Variation. So here Kramnik pulled off the move d4. We have knight to f6 by Garry Kasparov. c4. The game started as an anti-Nimzo Indian or counter Nimzo Indian setup with the move knight to f3. Here after move d5 and knight to c3, we have now the three knights variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined. And now comes the actual Vienna Variation move, which is now the move d takes c4. And as I said, there is a calmer way to proceed here, like Kramnik did with the move e3, or you could be more aggressive with the move e4. I now these days like to play the move e4, which creates, I think, really an open and dynamic game. After move e3, the game becomes, I think, more and more similar to the Queen's Gambit accepted lines, but with a huge difference that you have already played the move knight to c3. Let's go back a little bit. I wanted to show you what is the difference between this line and maybe the common Queen's Gambit accepted line, because when I play, for instance, something like d4 and my opponent plays d5, we play c4, then after d takes c4, you notice that we haven't played the move knight to c3. It's, I think, a huge difference, which you understand now in the Kramnik Kasparov game. After move d takes c4, immediately Queen's Gambit accepted, we can play knight to f3, protecting the d4 pawn and not allow here maybe a c5 pawn breakthrough. And then after something like e6 e3, maybe knight to f6 here, with the move bishop to c4, okay, black can still play the move a6 and then b5, but notice that your knight is not on c3, so the knight cannot be further kicked away with the potential b4 move. So it's a huge difference. That's why here in this game you see after moves here d takes c4, and when we play e3, here Garry Kasparov plays now the move a6, and it's a huge difference, because if you want to take now, then of course b5 and also b4 are opportunities to get some more spaces on the queen side, because now suddenly the knight is also an object of the potential pawn attack by black on the queen side. So that's why there are now many choices how to prevent this. In my opinion, still a4 is perfectly fine, but this move a4, it creates a little bit here of a hole around the square b4. In the continuation of the series, we're covering also this line, but let's stuck to the game, because here after move a6, Kramnik played now really one of the most dynamic ways here. He played now bishop takes c4, and here of course b5, we have bishop to d3, and now comes what is, in my opinion, maybe it's not an inaccuracy or mistake or blunder, but I think here after move c5, you have already exposed yourself with the pawns. In my opinion, a slightly better way to proceed here from black's perspective is to play bishop to b7 immediately. This move is very important because it controls now the square e4. You see again after a couple of moves why is it so important to control the e4 square, because still we can always play, let's flip the board, for instance, if white plays normal here kingside castling, then we can still play knight to d7, and we will have always the opportunity to play the move c5. So white cannot prevent this move c5 anyway, but at least we're controlling this very, very important square e4. You see here in this particular scenario, here Garry Kasparov didn't play bishop to b7 immediately. He played a very aggressive c5, and now it's a huge difference because your pawns are getting a little bit exposed, because the main advantage that you have here on black's in black's position is of course this 3 versus 2 pawn majority on the queen side. But now with the move a4, here Vladimir Kramnik is paralyzing basically the queen side, and now after move b4, which is a little bit forced, you see knight to e4 can be played. Now you see if you would have the bishop here, then the knight move on e4 would not be possible. So that's why I like a little bit this move order a little bit better, because we're playing still bishop to b7, controlling the e4, and we will have time to play the move c5 anyway, so we don't have to rush with the c5 immediately. So these are, in my opinion, the tiny little things that you have to value if you play an opening. You have to really be familiar with every particular line, because every move has its importance, every move has its value. So that's why when you study openings, don't think, okay, I play that every time. No, sometimes it's a little bit different, so you have to play some different moves in order to maybe reach a similar position. So here, in my opinion, slightly better move bishop to b7 than with the knight to d7 and then c5. So here, as we said, c5 a4 here by Vladimir Kramnik. He provokes now the move b4, and here after move knight to e4, we have now knight to d7. Here Kramnik takes, knight takes f6, and now kingside castling. We have now bishop to b7, and now also a very important move that you, in my opinion, have to play. It's the move d takes c5. For instance, there is not a better way to develop your dark square bishop. You could maybe try some ideas of b3, but then after c takes d4, okay, you could maybe take with the knight to d4, but now this diagonal for the light square bishop becomes more and more stronger. If you take, of course, with the pawn, then you have a long-term weakness, which is now an isolated pawn. Here bishop to e7, kingside castling, and then some ideas of bishop to f3 and queen to d4 are the main tactical threats. Just to grab the pawn, and we can also notice that white is left with a weak square around the square c3. So that's why d takes c5 also, okay, black takes the pawn with the tempo, but now with queen to e2, the position is about equal. Rook to d1 could be played, then e4, e5, bishop to f4, bishop to g5. So we want to now finally liberate our dark square bishop here from white's perspective. b3 is also an opportunity then afterwards to play something like bishop to b2. And here, for instance, the engine gives equal chances. So in my opinion, still, you see, although Kasparov played this very aggressive c5 early, still it's a playable line for black. In my opinion, in this Vienna variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined, black does have weaknesses, so black can secure the king by castling and has, I think, a comfortable game. So as I said, this is one method that you can apply, but in the continuation of the series we'll play a more solid way with the move bishop to b7, and then with the move knight to d7 as said, and then c5. So okay, here in the continuation, queen to d5 was played by Garry Kasparov. So Garry doesn't want to castle immediately. Really incredible already attacking move. He wants to maneuver his queen to h5. Now with the bishop pair here, with the potential knight move, he can include basically every piece into his attack. So of course we know how Garry Kasparov played the game. He played always the game in such a dynamic and beautiful way. After move queen to d5, we have now rook to d1. Now here also the threats is of course something like bishop to b5. We have now queen to h5, and now h3. The problem about this position of Vladimir Kramnik is that his dark square bishop is still passive. We can notice that that's the main issue here. Although when we watch also Garry Kasparov's position, a little bit the b4 is exposed, and there are maybe some squares here. There is always maybe the threat to play something like bishop to b5, then a takes b5, queen to b5, and then queen takes b7. So this is one of the tactics that could work. But now, for instance, if b3, if you play b3, then the problem is now if you play knight to e4, here the move bishop to b5 is not working, because black can simply retreat to f8, and then you have to step back somewhere with the bishop, and then you get knight to c3. So you see the b3 move would be very weak. There is always this potential knight to c3 move, which could cause now many position problems. So after move queen to h5, h3 perfectly fine. We're waiting still in this position. We have now rook to d8 here by Garry Kasparov, and now knight to d4. So we want now from white's perspective to trade off the queens. It's, I think, a good idea, because white is really a passive bishop. Black is here really a great setup, a great attacking formation, sort of. Both bishops, as we said, very aggressive, queen very active, knight can come into the game. So many of us would be scared maybe to play this position from white's perspective. So as I said, especially against a player like Garry Kasparov, so now releasing the pressure by trading off the queens was, I think, a decent idea here. So after move knight to d4, we have now queen to d5, continue the pressure around the square g2. We have now knight to f3. Now if you kingside castle immediately, then of course bishop to h7 is going to happen and you lose the queen. So that's why here Kasparov played a very cool move, king to e7. It is dangerous, of course, you're staying with the king in the center, but the center cannot be open immediately, so it's not a huge problem to stay with the king like this. But now here Kramnik plays a beautiful move. It's a beautiful gambit move. He plays now the move e4. He has to liberate finally this star square bishop. If this bishop stays there forever on c1, it wouldn't be a good position. So you could also sacrifice the pawn like this. You could also sacrifice maybe the b pawn after queen to b3, then bishop to b2, and suddenly you see white is playing the game all down the pawn, but now the rooks can come on some files. We can play bishop to c4, so suddenly again white has really a comfortable position. And also the engine, for instance, likes now suddenly a white's position. You have to play a gambit move, you have to sacrifice the pawn, but now you can breathe again, you can finally play with your bishops. I think it's a comfortable game. So as I said, but here Kramnik played the same idea in a different way. He sacrificed the e pawn just to get this diagonal for the bishop, also here perfectly fine. So we have now knight to e4, but now after bishop to e3, bishop takes e3, queen to e3, and suddenly you see there is now the tension on the d file. So that's why queen to c5, and now beautiful move by Vladimir Kramnik. He played now the move queen to e1. He doesn't want to now trade off the pieces more. He wants now to play rook to c1, then also maybe something like rook to c7. So here knight to f6. Garry Kasparov understands also his weak knight on e4 that could be taken because it was twice attacked by white's pieces. We have now rook from a to c1 attacking the queen, queen to b6, and now knight to e5. Now comes rook to d4, and here Vladimir Kramnik pulled off a beautiful tactical shot. Although probably here the best move is knight to c4, which wins the game immediately, because here you cannot go in front of the queen. Then you get knight to e3. It's then a weak position. Knight to e3. If you want to play, of course, something like this, then you get also knight to f5. This would be a beautiful tactic. If you retreat somewhere else with the queen, for instance, if you play something like queen to a7, then queen to b4 is also very dangerous. So it's almost game over here for black. But here Vladimir Kramnik played really sick and perfect tactic. It's more attractive. Maybe when it comes to computer evaluations, it's slightly worse to play this move, but it's still great. So still white is winning because here Vladimir Kramnik pulled off this move. I'm not sure how many of us would play this move. Here what you of course, if the queen takes, then the queen gets deflected from the defense of the rook. So that's why Kasparov played first rook takes d1. We have rook takes d1, and now we have bishop to a6. But now comes the beauty of this tactic. Here Vladimir Kramnik played queen to b4. Really wild stuff. After queen to b4, look at this, knight to c3. We have king to f8. That's the only move that prolongs the game, because if you play, of course, king to e8, then you get checkmated with knight to d8. So beautiful start. We have to play here king to f8. Still, it's not time to take the queen first. We played this intermediate check, rook to d8. Look how Kramnik played the game. Really incredible tactics. You have to play knight to e8, and now you take Again, this move comes with the tempo. We have bishop to e2, and now f3 locks simply the bishop. Now the bishop is useless here, and the problem is now if you play something like king to e7, then still you get knight to c3, knight to c6. You have to play king to f6 or king to f8, but now this knight is paralyzed, and now we just push b4, b5, b6. You just push these two connected pawns. The knight is paralyzed, the rook is paralyzed, and the king cannot come into the game. This was really brilliant, immortal chess tactic by Vladimir Kramnik. So here after move f3, Kasparov didn't play the move king to e7. He tried h5. He tried maybe sort of a path to get with the rook to somehow get this rook into the game, but it's a little bit too slow. b3 here paralyzes further the bishop. The bishop cannot breathe. The bishop doesn't have good squares. Even if you try bishop to d1, you see this square is even covered. So the bishop is out of game. So basically the rook and the knight are holding the king, the knight, the rook, and the bishop out of game. So really perfect tactic by Vladimir Kramnik. b3, really beautiful move. We have rook to h6, king to f2. The bishop is on fire. So here rook to g6. We have a bishop, king takes e2, rook takes g2, king to d3. Here Kasparov took the pawn, but here after move king to c4 in this position, Garry Kasparov resigns. So really beautiful tactics. You see that Vladimir Kramnik pulled off. I really enjoyed this game, especially because he played this maybe second best line, but still it was such a beautiful tactic where he paralyzed all of these pieces by black. Immortal stuff. So as I said, still let's go back a little bit to opening theory, because this game will use as our study of our Vienna variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined. So still, in my opinion, as I said, Garry Kasparov played here a decent aggressive line. b5, c5, okay, a5, a4, challenging knight to e4, knight to d7. So still, as I said, this is playable. The engine gives you equal chances. So if you want to play the Vienna variation of the Queen's Gambit Declined like this, you can choose it. But in the continuation of our series, we will analyze now this line. So bishop to b7, then you play here knight to d7, and then afterwards you can of course pull off the c5 move. Then you can play queen to b6, bishop to e7, bishop to d6, rook to d8, rook to c8, maybe kingside castling, and you have a solid game. So in my opinion, this is perfectly fine. Also the Garry Kasparov approach, you can choose whatever you like, but in my opinion, as I said also in the beginning of the Vienna variation series, the Vienna variation is perfectly fine. If you don't know what to play against d4, the Vienna variation is, in my opinion, a solid way to go into the game. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed the game. I really enjoyed it a lot, especially because of this brutal tactic by Vladimir Kramnik. Really mortal and beautiful chess. If you want to study more about the Queen's Gambit Declined, check out our whole series in which we have already explained some ideas of the Chigorin defense, Harvey's attack, semi-Tarrasch defense, and similar stuff, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.